crisis is not created by Bangladesh. This is something we need to assert to international community. Rohingya crisis is not created by Bangladesh, and its resolution is not at the hands of Bangladesh only. You are the future. You will be carrying this forward 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road. We will not be here. The mantle will be upon you because this is your country. You have to take care of it. Whenever I listen to Sir, it's mesmerizing, and Sir very eloquently pointed out the history of Rohingya crisis, what has happened since 2017, and a number of issues that we need to take into consideration. For example, Sir has identified the internal origin of the Rohingya crisis, that inside Myanmar, Sir has pointed out that it is an age-old crisis. It is their own crisis, their own problem. It is because of their exclusionary nationalism that the Bamar people, they have their own identity crisis, and in light of that, what they wanted to create a us versus them ideology, which will actually provide the us identity, a stronger identity, so that they have a them who they can identify as intruder, identify as minority. And at the same time, Sir has very poignantly pointed out the current geopolitical order, the re-emergence of power politics, which some often identify as multipolarity, but we know that this is not multipolarity, rather this is a time in international politics which is often seen as a crisis period in terms of settling of an international order. It is rather a competitive new world order, as Sir has pointed out, and Sir has also pointed out that how before the shock of the pandemic, or as we call it now, COVID endemic, before the shocks wore off, we are into the middle of another crisis, that is the Russia-Ukraine crisis, that although geographically it is confined within the within the continent of Europe, but its shock has unprecedented reach to different continents, and how it is creating instability in the, for example, energy market or food market. And in that sense, Sir compared Russia-Ukraine crisis with the impacts of the Second World War, because we live in an interdependent world where anything happening in one part of the world is certainly going to affect the other part of the world. So here, Sir has pointed out two very important markers of the Rohingya crisis, that there is a difference between Rohingyas being stateless and there's a difference being other population being stateless. For example, when there are refugees originating from Syria, refugees originating from Ukraine, they already have statist identity, but Rohingyas lack that statist identity. This is a very important point often we forget to identify in our conversation with others. And secondly, that how Myanmar perspective defines Rohingyas, how they create state narrative, how they create a sort of visual representation of Rohingyas. And here, Sir pointed out that the state and the people, they have a convergence of interest in identifying Rohingyas as their enemies, as in the Aung San Suu Kyi's regime, so-called democratic regime. It also identified Rohingyas as enemies, as well as the current military junta that identified Rohingyas as enemy of the country, as people who lack or who cannot be provided any kind of statist identity. So there is a very important dilemma, statelessness and how Rohingyas are identified as pariah by both the state and the people inside Myanmar. Then again, the geopolitical issue on geopolitical issues are pointed out very importantly, that how a number of countries they are providing aid to Myanmar junta. They have provided aid to Myanmar in general, despite condemnation of the Rohingya crisis. For example, last year March, United States of America identified Rohingya the atrocities against Rohingya as a genocide. This year, in the anniversary of military rulers taking over power in Myanmar, they have once again provided sanctions on people. Despite that, if we look back in time, around January 15, Al Jazeera report identified that Western countries have not seized their business interest in Myanmar. For example, timber trade is an important area where European countries as well as America is conniving with the Myanmar military rulers, as well as supplying of arms arms as well as production of arms. This where a number of significant European countries as well as America are working in connection. Third, Russia's renewed connection with Myanmar. This is something we have seen. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov has paid visit to Myanmar. This has not ceased. With North Korea under the Food for Gun program. Originally, North Korea and Myanmar started their cooperation in defense areas in 2010, and that has renewed. They have started new missile making program where surface to air, air to air missile programs are being worked out with Myanmar counterparts. Under the Food for Gun program, Myanmar is supposed to provide food deliveries via China to North Korea, whereas North Korea is providing expertise, technical expertise, technical know-how to Myanmar in the case of developing or aiding their submarines with ballistic missiles and other types of missiles. So, 5 days ago, if you look at the news, that Myanmar's military rulers are now letting the loyal citizens to carry guns. So how do you define loyal citizens? You see how this is being, the internal political situation in Myanmar is once again going to erupt in a very violent manner. Then again, Myanmar's nuclear ambition. This is another area that has come to international press, that whether Myanmar is harboring some kind of nuclear ambition. Then again, in January, it was reported, and the meeting took place in February 20, that Myanmar was invited in ASEAN Defense Ministries meeting plus experts working group on maritime security issues, where apart from the ASEAN member countries, there were some other very significant members of so-called rules-based international order were there. Who were the members? Australia, United States, United Kingdom, China, and some other important countries, significant countries. So, as Sar pointed out, as well as Sabbir Bhai pointed out, that whose geopolitics are we talking about? So, there are two ways of looking at this perspective. I won't take much time, as they know, when I start talking, it's very difficult to stop. So I won't take much time. I will talk about only two other issues. That whose geopolitics are we talking about? We have already seen how Myanmar is seen as a significant country by the West in general, as well as China and some other Asian countries. And at the same time, as Sabbir Bhai has talked about, that we need to build our own strength. So I think time has passed of saying over and over again that Myanmar is important to the West, that how can we create our agenda setting power, how can we create Bangladesh's voice in international politics. That is, I think, where now we need to pay attention to. We have been talking about this for a long time, that Bangladesh is not a small state. Size does not guarantee of greatness or smallness. This is something we need to realize, we need to remember, and we need to reflect this in our talks, in our conferences, in our dealing with other countries. Why I'm saying this? Ukraine is a country which has only 39 million, population is only 39 million. We went to Mauritius taking 4 students in a IORA program. Mauritius is a country which is very small, which hosts 1.3 million people. In only Cox's Bazar region, in our southeast region, we are hosting 1.3 million Rohingyas. So you can see Bangladesh is a country, being a country of about 170 million. How can we call Bangladesh as a small state? This is something we need to realize. We need to assert in our dealings with the others that Bangladesh is not a small country. We have power. We have power in terms of realizing the potentials of our people, and how can we sort of establish that. A number of people are quite shaky in identifying from Bangladesh. Identifying Bangladesh is not as a small state, but we can see in the writings coming from the West, in writings coming from Australia, Bangladesh is increasingly being called as a rising middle power or an emerging middle power. It is time that we embrace that. We embrace that with sort of a note of caution that yes, Bangladesh is a rising middle power or Bangladesh is an emerging middle power, but at the same time Bangladesh has an agenda setting power. Bangladesh is willing to welcome any country that can come to Bangladesh's aid in resolving its issues or in sort of assisting Bangladesh is in managing Rohingya crisis, because Rohingya crisis is not created by Bangladesh. This is something we need to assert to international community. Rohingya crisis is not created by Bangladesh, and its resolution is not at the hands of Bangladesh only. So we need to have this international conversation and not let the conversation die, because we know, because of rising crisis in Europe, and Europe, as Kishore Mahbubani very eloquently pointed out, that why 12% of the population's crisis would be considered as a world's crisis. Europe's crisis, Europe need to learn to manage by itself. It has a long-term impact, as Delwar sir has pointed out, and we need to deal with that after effect, aftershock, long-term shock of that crisis. But that does not mean that the world will take its attention away from Rohingya crisis. Last but not the least, I would point out that this kind of talks and students' involvement, it can be students' talk as well, that we do not always need experts, so-called, I don't want to call myself as an expert because there's a lot to learn yet, but so-called senior people coming to a talk does not make it very important, but we also need students to sort of activate their arguments, their understanding, and have talks. And one other idea that I would like to suggest, for example, can we have a sort of understanding at the civil society level, at the students level, more connection with the students of Myanmar? What are they thinking? Why do they not accept Rohingyas as their population? This is something we need to learn from them. And can we establish some kind of collaboration, connection with the students? And last but not the least, can we arrange a virtual connectivity and virtual concert for the Rohingyas, so through which we can create an international awareness so that Rohingya crisis does not die? And I would request forums like this to take up more of these initiatives, where students of Bangladesh will be connecting with the students of Myanmar as well as students of other countries, so that, because you are the future, you will be carrying this forward 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, we will not be here. The mantle will be upon you, because this is your country, you have to take care of it. Thank you.